At this point, there's no debate anymore about the fate of Silent Hill 2 Remake in the commercial department. The game has been out for more than 2 weeks now, and we're already getting good news about the sales surpassing the 1 million mark in just several days after launch. To be honest, even though I was optimistic, I never expected these results to happen this fast, especially because I know how the horror market can be challenging and it takes time for a game to shine after release. But little did I know, the audience was actually so ready for Silent Hill to come back to the scene, and their passion for the franchise stood the test of time. With that being said, this course of events pushed me to make a comparison in my mind between Silent Hill 2 Remake and another similar game that came out in the same month last year, which is the one and only Alan Wake 2.
Is a monster. And monsters are men.
The huge contrast between the two games' commercial performances led me to think about what made one of them stand out and take the bigger piece of the cake. So, in this quick video, I want to talk about the key differences that simply make Alan Wake 2 unable to duplicate the Silent Hill 2 formula, and why Silent Hill 2 Remake is one step ahead in all cases. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Even though Alan Wake has been around for 14 years now, the game never had the chance to create any stable legacy because the developers simply couldn't create a sequel until Epic Games decided to fund them and have a partnership with them. I don't know about you guys, but for me as a veteran horror fan, I remember those years of 2014 and 2015 when Alan Wake 2 was literally a myth that I read rumors about and watched fake trailers of before realizing the bitter truth that it's not coming out anytime soon. There was even a viral gameplay video 9 years ago that people were impressed with, believing the game was about to be revealed, but it always falls short in the end.
I'm Alan Wake, a writer, a creator. I know the rules of the game. My specialty is fiction that can change the world. Words of power that can bend reality to my will. I'll show you how.
So believe it or not, in 15 years, we only had 2 Alan Wake games, and the first one didn't even gain momentum and became relatively popular until after 3 years of its release. So even though the name Alan Wake is familiar to us as horror fans, the game itself remains very niche to this day, and only a specific type of audience is willing to buy it and give it a chance.
Okay, someone's messed with the fuse box here, but you should be able to jury-rig it while I find the keys.
I already got electrocuted once today. How about I look for the keys and you get burned for a change?
On the other hand, Silent Hill 2 is not just part of a series. It's also seen by many people as the ultimate horror game of all time and has an enormous cult following. And when I say cult following, I mean people of all ages and even people who weren't into horror. So fans of the original game, which was released in 2001, were eager for a remake. And keep in mind, classic games always have an advantage because nostalgia plays a substantial role in making people have a deep connection with a game because they would love to relive their younger selves. Furthermore, the emotional depth, psychological horror, and iconic characters like Pyramid Head have left a lasting cultural impact, drawing both old fans and new players to the remake because even the ones who didn't play the original know very well who the heck Pyramid Head is and how terrifying he can be. So when it comes to legacy, Silent Hill 2 Remake had the upper hand on so many levels because it inherited more than 2 decades of history, regardless of how good or bad some installments are. I mean, make no mistake, even though some Silent Hill games didn't succeed, they still have influence on so many players, and I personally consider Downpour one of the most memorable experiences in horror gaming because it actually had an amazing chill atmosphere that people like me enjoy going through. When people reflect on Silent Hill 2 and what makes them admire it, gameplay rarely takes center stage, because the game was never designed with a primary focus on gameplay mechanics. Instead, it's always the story that fascinates everyone, with its complex and intriguing narrative that works as an invitation for players to delve deeper into its rich details. The journey of James to find his deceased wife Mary after receiving a mysterious letter from her is a story that mixes the ordinary with horror in a strange manner. At first, it seems like a romantic mission of a man who can't wait to see his wife, but then you remember that his wife is literally dead in the first place. This triggers your curiosity because you can only think of two scenarios. The first is maybe his wife is alive and there's been a misunderstanding about her demise, and the second is that James basically lost his mind and he's drowning in his hallucinations. As you progress, you start to witness how the plot weaves themes of grief, guilt, loss, and personal redemption, making the narrative intensely emotional and deeply human. James's internal struggle and the mystery surrounding Mary's demise are central to the experience, with the game using Silent Hill Town as a manifestation of James's psychological torment. This level of emotional profoundness was rare for video games at the time, and here we are 23 years later, and yet we didn't see a similar game to this day. The game's world is filled with symbolic imagery that reflects James's inner psyche. Every monster, setting, and character serves as an embodiment of his guilt, desires, and subconscious. Even the infamous Pyramid Head represents his feelings of punishment and desire for retribution. So in conclusion, the psychological horror in Silent Hill 2 is not just about external threats, it's also about confronting personal demons, making it feel more intimate and disturbing than typical horror games based on physical fear. Strangely enough, Alan Wake's story is actually the closest thing possible to this, but with key differences that keep it away from the competition. The protagonist, Alan Wake, is also a husband searching for his wife, Alice, who disappears under mysterious circumstances. Not only that, but here there's also a nightmarish realm called the Dark Place, which is basically similar to Silent Hill Town and highlights Alan's deepest fears. However, to be fair, what makes Alan Wake unique is the antagonist, Mr. Scratch. He is essentially a twisted, sinister copy of Alan Wake, and he mimics Alan's appearance but with a malevolent personality. While Alan is struggling to maintain his sanity and fight the darkness, Mr. Scratch revels in chaos, committing violent acts and tormenting those close to Alan. He embodies the dark side of Alan's mind, and to make it simple for you, he's a serial killer and a complete psychopath.
You knew I'm a psycho. I told you I'm a psycho. Really, I'm a psycho.
But despite these powerful points in the story, it remains very fictional and you can hardly resonate with it as a human. Meanwhile, James's story is actually something that many of us can relate to even in our real lives, because what he's going through is based on realistic elements, and his biggest enemy is not the monsters, but rather his own mind and his actions in the past. In other words, this is a story designed to touch you in a distressing way and not to entertain you. However, it's important to understand that Alan Wake 2 has deep changes in the story compared to the original game, and that's not necessarily a good thing at all. Generally, the sequel continues the story of Alan Wake, a writer stuck in a twisted dimension known as the Dark Place, where his writing alters reality itself in so many ways. But the difference here is that you have one more protagonist to control, and you also have way more confusing events, which leads the gameplay and original story to seem less and less relevant. The new main character here is an FBI agent called Saga Anderson, investigating a sinister cult and a series of supernatural events involving an entity known as the Dark Presence, which possesses people. But as you keep advancing in the game, Saga's history, personality, and role become more and more heavy in the story, which leads to a very dense story structure. Splitting the story between Alan and Saga led to a huge focus problem because each character has their own background, but they somehow need to intertwine in one way or another. And since Saga is a character that we didn't see in the original game, the sequel seems to spend a lot of time trying to introduce you to her. This intensifies your confusion because the non-linear storytelling, multiple realities, and cryptic clues reach a point where they can really become a downside.
What is that? These aren't the same tracks that were here before. They're headed into the tree, not... My flashlight burned the dark stuff away.
The game's exaggerated focus on narrative can actually overshadow gameplay, especially during long exposition scenes that may disrupt the flow for those seeking more action-driven moments. Now don't get me wrong, Silent Hill 2 is also story-driven and was never about action. But as I said earlier, Silent Hill 2's powerful plot compensates anything else in the game and forces you to remain interested in progressing and reaching the outcome. But in Alan Wake 2, you actually get to a point when you start to think it's boring and you don't even know if some events have a purpose or they're just meant to make the game longer. Because when you don't have a genius story put together in a psychological game, many people would start thinking it's basically a movie or a walking simulator, which can minimize the game's potential audience.
Hello?
Alan Wake,
Yes.
do you know who I am?
No? Who is this?
We'll get to that later. There are spies all over. Shadows.
I spoke earlier about the huge importance of Silent Hill 2's iconic story and how James's journey is so unique. But what makes the experience way more special here is that the side characters are something to remember, as if they're basically separate main characters going through their own journeys. One of the characters is Angela Orozco, and when you meet her in the beginning, she is just a troubled young woman searching for her mother in Silent Hill. However, she has a very traumatic past, including incidents with her father and brother, who did some nasty stuff to her, and I hope you understood what I mean because I can't explain in detail. Even her mother was not kind to her, and she used to blame her for what happens to her and refuses to see her as a victim.
Even Mama said it. I deserved what happened.
No, Angela, that's wrong.
No, don't pity me. I'm not worth it.
Nevertheless, her conversations with James are marked by moments of shared suffering and understanding, emphasizing how Silent Hill reflects each character's personal struggles and how they're all connected.
Or you could just force me. Like he always did. You disgusting pig.
Next, we have Eddie Dombrowski, and he's basically the opposite of any other human character in the town. But just like anyone else here, he is navigating his own demons within Silent Hill. Struggling with self-loathing and resentment due to years of bullying and ridicule, he harbors a deep anger that usually manifests in violent outbursts. His actions in Silent Hill reveal his descent into madness, as he justifies his aggression by insisting he was always treated unfairly, and he's a victim of society.
But you know what? It doesn't matter if you're smart, dumb, ugly, pretty. It's all the same once you're dead.
In some way, Eddie's story serves as a cautionary parallel to James, demonstrating how unaddressed anger and resentment can lead to destructive ends. And this is why Eddie is also a crazy, disturbing antagonist here that you'll need to fight at some point. In the same terrifying town, there's a young girl called Laura, and she's somehow showcasing a completely different attitude than the usual, and by this, I mean that she's the only one who's actually normal and cheerful. The reason for this is because Laura does not experience the same nightmarish version of Silent Hill due to her innocence and lack of inner guilt that define other people's experiences there.
Let go!
Sorry, Laura, but I can't let you just run around this place. You might get hurt.
Hurt by what?
Look, just stay with me, okay? This is no place for a kid.
She represents a sense of purity and sincerity, often challenging James by reminding him of his wife and his past actions as if she's tormenting him, but in a very innocent manner. When we focus more, we realize that her presence in the story brings out James's protective side and evokes memories of a life he lost. This might refer to a buried side of James that goes back to when he wanted to be a father and have a child during his marriage.
What's the big deal?
Why can't you just tell me?
You gonna yell at me if I don't?
No, I won't.
So if we're being honest, there's literally no valid comparison with Alan Wake 2 in the character side because there's no similar people in the Alan Wake universe at all. As I said before, the only unique character in my opinion is Mr. Scratch, but his presence in the sequel was not even as powerful as the previous entry. Details like these are crucial for selling games to players, as many fans remember Silent Hill 2 primarily for its characters and their stories above all else. This focus has essentially built its own brand, sparking countless fan theories about each character's background and even debates about whether they are real or not. In other words, guys, even though Alan Wake 2 is one of the most beautiful horror games ever made visually, and it's insanely polished, it's not even close to competing with Silent Hill 2, because history, nostalgia, and storyline are always on Silent Hill's side. This is why, realistically, the only horror franchise that has a similar legacy is Resident Evil and no one else. And even though Alan Wake 2's sales are not horrible so far and they're improving, they're still so disappointing for the developers compared to the effort they spent on it. I mean, keep in mind that it took the game 2 months to surpass the million mark, while it took Silent Hill 2 only 3 days to reach the same number, despite the poor optimization on the PC version. Anyway, I think I said all what I wanted to say about these two games, and I really wanted to create this video because I couldn't ignore the difference between the two games' commercial success despite their similarities on the outside. Let me know in the comments below if you played the two games and what you really think about them. Are you among the people who think Alan Wake 2 is very underrated and deserves more? Or are you among the audience that thinks Silent Hill 2 is on a complete, whole new level? And they're not even in the same league. Either way, give me a like if you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you soon.
Mary?
James.